How's it going, VRTO? I'm Asad. I'm the VP Art Director here at Pixomondo.
And I'm Zack, Lighting Supervisor at Pixomondo.
So a bit about us. Pixomondo is a VFX house. Some of the titles the team's worked on in the past. You might remember from last year, one of our early deep dives into Unreal and real-time was our Star Trek Short Treks film, The Girl Who Made the Stars. And since then, the team's built one of North America's largest virtual production stages, currently being used for two of our flagship shows this year. Anyway, plenty more to come, and can't wait to share that with all you guys once that is done.
We want to show you guys what the process is like, all the way from the build to the content, all the way through the shoots, and hopefully we'll touch on how you can start learning, plus implementing this new tech and techniques in your own production.
Cool. So on to the actual build and the pandemic. So a whole bunch of stuff changed at the start of 2020, as we all know, namely the shift to work from home. Now, since then, a lot of stuff came up, a lot of pushes on the virtual production front. This doesn't just mean Mandalorian LEDs like we often think of when we hear virtual production. It's more an all-encompassing term that covers everything from design, storyboarding, previs, full CG animation, and of course the LED stage. So if you're using a game engine for any part of your production, chances are that it falls under the umbrella of virtual production. So Zoom meetings and screen shares kind of became the norm. Since then, while we've experimented with the use of Unreal's multi-user sessions, so here folks from the team could kind of live in the same space and collaborate from home. You could kind of see in the footage here, Josh's floating head and my own floating head. We're just kind of jumping around in the scene and essentially shooting it live through an iPad, kind of treating it like a multiplayer FPS game. And of course, with the COVID of it all, limited travel meant that LED stages were about to be developed much faster, just out of necessity. And you can hear some of the footage of one of our super early tests. This was pre-COVID. This was, I think, 2019. Yeah, basically, after a series of pitches, our flagship LED shows were booked for the year. And before we knew it, the shooting date was kind of hurtling towards us. So we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges of that here. And Matt P., Josh Karekis, Linda Vo, Jack Chadwick, they could speak more to kind of the logistical challenges of this entire build. With all of the travel restrictions in place, there would naturally be kind of tons of errors and shipping delays from gathering parts, gathering the crew, shipping all the necessary equipment, and then actually building the thing while R&Ding it. So lots of elements of this build had to be built in tandem with one another as equipment and parts were arriving. When it came over to shipping, they used, if you ask Matt, pretty much every contingency, boats, planes, roads, on foot, you name it. Pretty much everything was used to hit the delivery and build the thing.
So starting off when production begins, something you'll hear super often with the growth of virtual production is the term, we'll fix it in post. Well, it's now been flipped to, we have to fix it in pre. So while your visual effects normally gets built after you shoot, months down the road, in the case of virtual production, all that has to be finished before your camera even starts rolling. So it was crucial in our case to step back into the show's productions at a very early stage. Pre-production, when all the ideas for the show, pre-script even, are being fleshed out. Asking the question of what kind of content works best here and how can the spaces that we shoot them in be designed around that. Take, for example, the idea of instancing. One of Unreal's strengths is handling a huge amount of geometry as long as it's instanced or repeated. So after a few initial calls with the show's art department, we'd see designs coming back that had some more repeating shapes in them, perhaps more ribbing or different scales of the same shape being used and built in the larger shapes. So the designs themselves begin to feed into Unreal's strengths and vice versa. Another piece that needed to be considered super early was the blend points between the practical set and the virtual set. How was the scene going to be masked? How was it going to be blended together? The pre-production stage was a great place to plan out a few experiments for this. All the way from having a completely open, clean blend, the most challenging, to a diegetic lip around the LED wall, all the way to designing the whole environment around the shape of the LED wall. And all of this was being planned out months in advance before the shoot. Pre-virtual production and pre-COVID, this kind of direct communication with the client was rare. And now we have this great opportunity to talk with the client, talk with the art department, and really get everything ironed out from the very beginning.
And then it came time to build the content that was going to go up on that wall and kind of build the pipeline around that. So yeah, kind of one of the driving sentiments behind our workflow development was something that we learned early on, which was to plan for the stage, not just post from the get-go. So kind of initially the thought was that 99% of everything could be done outside of Unreal and could later be brought together in Engine to be rendered live. So kind of treating the engine as a renderer added to the end of an existing visual effects pipeline. So our thoughts quickly changed to everything from geo, textures, project structure, all of that should be built with Unreal in mind right from the beginning, or built in Unreal entirely. So number one was to adopt some form of source control, like we mentioned last time, like SVN or Perforce. Everyone's kind of used to having their own Maya scene in traditional visual effects, working on components in isolation, at which point a layout artist, lighter, or an environment artist could kind of bring all that together later down the chain. Now everyone's living in the same project from the beginning, so artists have to start kind of thinking of their assets in the context of a live communal space, not just their own Maya scene. So they would have to kind of keep track of their assets' dependencies, ensure nothing, if I break something over here, it doesn't break something halfway across the world or halfway across the project, and then get pushed to the rest of the team inadvertently. So 100% we needed a system to kind of smooth this whole process out, which was source control. So now everyone's living in the same space, all of their files are floating around in the same project. Now we have to avoid all the clutter that comes with that. So we're going to adopt a style guide. In our case, we're branching off of the Game Making LLC style guide, commonly used in the Unreal community, and it's pretty familiar to anyone that's bought assets off of the Epic Games marketplace. They all kind of follow the same structure, so we'll have some sort of familiarity there. So basically, our aim with this whole thing was to make it so that if I'm a new user coming into the project, and if I've seen anything in the marketplace before, I'll immediately know where everything is in this environment. And with all that infrastructure set up, we've got to build the content that's actually going to go on it now. So our mantra super early on became optimize, 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 or start low and go slow, which I'm sure you'll hear us mention a lot. So how much did we need to optimize? The task for each environment was to deliver something that could run at a minimum of 48 FPS in 2K. By like halfway through the show, this was raised up to 140 FPS. That's what we needed to run on. So while running end display, which is a performance hit, with multiple camera frustrums rendering the scene in full resolution simultaneously. So there was a lot to compute, basically. And we had to have some dynamic lights between these shots that we could kind of tweak angle by angle. So we couldn't render an entire environment offline, basically like in traditional VFX, and then just display it in Unreal. It had to actually kind of be interactive. As VFX artists, we're kind of used to using an infinitely detailed, uncompressed set of like maybe 16K textures, millions and billions of polygons, and just sending it to the farm and letting it render overnight. So to an extent, we were able to somewhat think this way when doing the shorts last year, because we're still kind of rendering that out and it's just a video that you're playing. We didn't have that luxury this time around because it needed to be live. So if we dip below that 24 FPS while we're shooting, it would be a big problem, right? If the environment just doesn't match your actors in the middle of a shoot day.
I think that's something, that we thought from the very beginning. We did all the bells and whistles. We said, all right, let's ray trace. Let's have ray trace reflections and GI and transmission and refractions, and things were looking great. And we threw it up on the wall and it was running at 5 frames a second. And we had to really take a step back and go, okay, whoa, wait a second. We thought we could do all these fancy things and it's not running and it's not performing. So we had to really take back and go back and reevaluate our approach of how we're going to light these environments. And so it came down to, the traditional dynamic hybrid / baking, basically, a video game pipeline of baking down, most of our lighting besides, specific dynamic lighting.
By the way, big thanks to Joe Finlayson, Matt Ostale, and Trent Atwood for their guidance in developing all of this optimization workflow here.
Thank you.
So these first 3 console commands that we're seeing here, kind of beyond the built-in optimization view modes that you have in Unreal, these console commands were like the Bible for our environments. So if we can keep our frame rate above board and check what our bottlenecks are, like CPU bottlenecks through stat RHI, GPU bottlenecks through stat GPU, and in 99% of cases, we'll have what we need just with those two to kind of hit the photoreal mark while keeping our frames above board. So, but to get a little more granular, artists also got kind of into the habit of using the GPU visualizers super often. Again, this is built into Unreal. It's in vanilla. You can use these at home. When it came to texturing, we wouldn't want to go any higher than 8K and no higher than 4K for like standard assets, basically kind of treating it like a game dev project. So there'd be minimal compression here, and these files would be super lightweight. In cases where we might be doing some heavy grading on set, like we need a bunch of information in the shadows and we're really going to be playing with it like on the day, then we would use like 16-bit EXRs. But again, this would be super sparingly. And initially we'd take all of our UDIMs, like multiple textures that you'd slap onto one asset, and we kind of try to squeeze them into the engine with Unreal's virtual texturing streaming framework. This is solid for game dev. It's familiar for people that are used to VFX, but it gave us a couple of snags in virtual production, namely like pop-in and instability. And this isn't necessarily a virtual texture streaming issue. This is really just because of how easy virtual texture streaming made it for us as artists to try and cram things into the project. So it was kind of an exercise in getting ourselves more disciplined as optimizers to just say, okay, we're not going to use virtual texture streaming, we're just going to optimize. And kind of the faster your team grows, the harder it is to catch performance hits like this before they start grinding your project to a halt. It could be a showstopper potentially. So just safety, we're not going to use it yet. So what we end up with is single UDIM assets, kind of standard PBR texture channels like your base color, roughness, metalness. And on top of that, we can use some more RGB masks. Something they'll often do as games is just pack a bunch of black and white masks into one image into each red, green, blue channel. So you have like 4 times the information packed into a single texture. We could use tricks like layering different scales of triplanar noise onto a shader. We could texture bomb things so they just look patchy and not repeating. This was just kind of like part of the bag of tricks you would use in Unreal to kind of make your procedural shaders look more bespoke and custom. So throughout this project, we adopted more and more game dev texturing techniques, like using trim sheets more often, kind of using RGB packing, like I mentioned. And all of this stuff alone would cut a project down from like 120 gigs down to like 30. And when it came to poly counts, this was, of course, hardware dependent, but our rule of thumb was to keep our environments under the 10 million triangle mark when looking in any particular direction. So we kind of learned that we needed to split and manage our assets a little bit differently from the norm to kind of play to Unreal's strengths. So if we have a large, like high-res hero asset that takes up our entire horizon, we should split that thing up into sections based on how much of it we're viewing at a time. So this is just so when we're looking at a chunk of that asset, it's not like all of the chunks that are off camera are being processed in the background. Even if we're not using frustum culling in a scene, we would still want to split our assets just for Unreal to determine LODs, which are based on the size that an asset takes up on your screen. So if it's super distant, but it's huge, you're never going to see those lower LODs. So another reason to split our assets up. And I mean, finally, if we have a giant asset with like intricate bespoke textures, this would seem a little challenging, but by splitting our assets up, this turns into something that's a lot more manageable. We're no longer dealing with like a massive asset and trying to squeeze a ton of detail into it. We're just building a bunch of smaller assets and building something bigger out of that in engine.
So, virtual production for lighting. What are the do's? What are the don'ts? What are our targets and goals, the problems we had, the solutions we had? So I'll be going over a lot of this with Asad and kind of tell you our experiences of what we had to go through in order to get a final product and final image up on the stage, filmable, and looking great, of course. First off, we always start off with budget and performance. At the beginning of a project, Asad and I and all the other leads and soups will be asking ourselves, what's our performance budget? What's our render target for X environment? So we're all kind of sharing this budget, and we all have to sacrifice a little bit or give up a little bit in order to satisfy everyone in the team to get an overall balanced image and environment that looks good for the client. So we generally, in lighting, we like to use the KISS method, which is to keep it stupid simple. We always have to keep in mind that, things need to be performant before they're pretty. And, at the end of the day, I think it's so important as a lighter to look at your scene as a whole and ask yourself, when you place the light, what's this light's value? Is it really adding that much to the scene? And one thing I always encourage the other lighting artists to do as well is just delete the light and say, was it really needed? We don't have the luxury of making things look pretty without consequences. That's the game. I think that's the challenge that we face every single day in every environment.
I think it also kind of forced all of us as artists to get super disciplined with what contributes to our scene and what doesn't really help. What can I hack away at? And what should I actually keep?
Exactly. And setting our own expectations, let's start off with a simple key light, fill light, and see where that gets us, and then look at the image and go, okay, where can we really spice things up? One thing Unreal does incredibly well at is Unreal provides physically accurate lighting, normalized lighting. So we get to use real world units like candela, lux, and lumens. And this is incredibly helpful because we can just do a quick Google search and we have a plethora of resources online to say, a light bulb is 1400 lumens, or, what is a fluorescent light? What is a street light? We also get to use Kelvin temperatures, which is really important because as we all know, that's a common language between, traditional film and VFX. On set, your gaffers or your lighting gaffers and your DP are going to be using Kelvin temperatures. So it's great that we can speak that common language with the DP and with the people on set. One other thing we like is motivated sources of light. Coming from traditional VFX is that we're so used to things acting physically correct and coming from a motivated source. I think with Unreal, you can kind of get away from that quickly because it's a video game engine where you can have, a floating point light in the middle of nowhere casting no cast shadows, and it can quickly, get out of the realm of reality. So one thing we always try to strive for, try not to break the plane of reality, because that is what we're trying to mimic after all. Another really important thing all the way from the beginning is extreme organization. You don't want to have a disorganized scene from the very start of production. That also is extremely important when we're on the stage, we're with the DP. We don't want to look that we're scrolling around our scenes in groups and, I think that light's in here. It's like, no, I know that light's here. I can get to that light and I can make a change within, 20 to 30 seconds. So what are some of the problems and challenges that we face, when lighting for virtual production? Well, one is performance. We have hardware limitations of how far we can push something real time. And with hardware limitations, that brings artistic limitations. How are we going to make this look good? And we had to really say, all right, we're going to have to mimic what ray tracing is doing, but it be in a baked hybrid environment and really kind of fake it to look like it's ray tracing real time. And one of these problems with that too is that this is a 360-degree environment, and Asad can attest to this too. In traditional VFX, we're just building that one area and nothing exists outside of that area. But now in virtual production, the director can look 360 degrees anywhere they want, up, down, left, or right, every nook and cranny, and not only that, but zoom in on it at a very long focal length,
300 millimeters.
Yeah, 300 millimeter, and you have to, say, oh, wow, it has to look good. But luckily, we have hotspot areas. So, we'll sit down with the production team and go, what is going to be your focus when you're filming this? Am I going to film this corner and this corner for, 90% of my shots? And we'll put most of our energy and our resource allowance into those hotspots. And that's where we have, some floating dynamic lights that come in. So on the day of, if they hit one of those spots that we didn't put, 600% effort into, we can have some of these floating lights in there just to kind of create some rims and pings and some life in there to kind of bring it back up to par of, what we establish as a good visual fidelity. Another problem and challenge that we face is blending. practically to virtual set. If there's not a railing or a trim or some bushes, then that means that we have to blend seamlessly from a practical set to a LED virtual set. And then where it gets really challenging is when we get into things like tiles or, one environment. I can't say what it was or what show, but there was a certain very complex patterning in it. And we had to match hexagonal practical floor to the LED virtual, which required a lot of measurements, a lot of talking with the art department, and a whole lot of LiDAR scanning in order to get that match one-to-one. Another problem and challenge that we face is common language with the DP or the director. It's very important to have common terminology between each other because our languages are so different. They know what their stage lights are, and we know our terminologies in Unreal and traditional VFX, but it's about blending those two together and really educating each other so we can have a form of communication. And it's important to educate ourselves as well, to ask questions, ask the DP, what is that light's name? What is it doing? What is the purpose that you use that for? How many instances do you find that? So what are some of our solutions with, these problems that we have in lighting? I think the best saying, and Asad said it earlier, is optimize, optimize, optimize. That is 90% of what we're doing all the time. At every stage. It's very important that we optimize at every stage so we don't, get into a snowball effect of we're at the end of a project, it's going to film in a week, and now the scene is not performant and we don't know where the bottleneck is. Whereas if we're optimizing every step of the way, Geo comes in, is it running, at performance? No. Okay, then it's just Geo problem. Okay, now it is running at performance. Now we're adding shaders and look dev. Is it performant? No, okay, now we have too many shader instructions. And until that's fixed, now we're at lighting, and now we know it's a lighting problem. So it's very important at every step of the way, not only in our projects, but, to all of your projects out there, whether it's personal or a bigger, scale. Optimizing is just so important to do every step of the way. And even down from a personal project, I encourage everyone out there to optimize your own scenes and projects every step of the way from the very beginning to the very end, because it will pay off so greatly, and you'll be thanking yourself. So our solution is optimize, optimize, optimize. We have, a lighting checklist. We always say, are we cache shadows off? Is this light dynamic? Is this stationary? Are we going to switch this light to static? Pay attention to your attenuation radiuses. How much geometry is this affecting? We always tell the team, at least lighting wise, light within your limits. Don't oversell it. But I think that's one of the most challenging and rewarding aspects of it is to say, we are confined within this box and we are constantly at the seams of it, ready to burst this box open because we're just pushing the limits to the extremes. We're redlining stuff. We're trying to cram as much as we can. We say, we only have one FPS to spare on the stage. We have one frame. We're one frame rate above performant, and
just
and
enough
that's
to add a
because
few sparks.
Exactly.
So we'll add them in. Yeah.
And we're just trying to, add as much as we can to make these environments look great. And to satisfy ourselves and the client and create the best possible final image.
Yeah. Kind of forced us all to become a little bit more technical. Everyone kind of turned into a generalist through this. Everyone got to know every other department super well, just out of necessity. So that was cool. It kind of whipped us into shape.
Yeah, we have big muscles now. But in general, in lighting, and I think all across Unreal, it's fake it till you make it. What alternative methods can we do to get back to physically based reality, but faking it, all the way from fog to smoke cards to lighting to lens glares or lens flares and glares and effects, all that stuff we fake in. We're mimicking constantly what a camera would see through a lens would do. And, even though there is, artistic sides of it, we get stuff naturally through the lens on stage of, bloom and stuff like that happening, coming through the stage. But sometimes, the camera doesn't capture all to make things look great. We have to throw in those glares or those bloom cards to really, sell it as an artistic choice or mood or something like that the DP or the director wants. And, there's a lot of faking involved, but strategically faking. So when we're on the stage and it's time to shoot, what happens? What do we expect? And, what are we looking for? What is the client looking for? What do we need to have ready? We touched base earlier that organization and preparation is key from beginning to end. And it's so important when you're on stage. We don't want to embarrass ourselves with our own scene and navigation. From a big studio like ours down to, anyone's personal project, if you're organized right at the beginning, you're not going to get a headache out of your own scene. Creating a naming convention for yourself is so beneficial, and it'll teach you, this is how all the big studios operate. So even, if you're an independent developer or artist, this is just a good habit to get into, because this is something you're going to have to do from your basement or from your living room all the way to a 500-person studio. One of our most challenging aspects on our shoot days is blending and blend points. It's an extremely, iterative process and complex process depending on what we have to blend between practical to virtual stage. So, we have a bunch of test days that we go to the stage. The client brings in a small crew with them, and we just throw the environment up on the wall and we say, okay, how is this environment working? We develop all these environments, and we're looking at them through, the form of, fly-throughs or quick times or Zoom calls. But now you put it on this giant stage. Wow, that's way out of scale, or that color is whack. Because at a certain point, it needs to come out of Zoom and it needs to be seen through the lens of a camera. And that's when I personally feel that you really get to feel all this hard work come together, and you see it through that camera lens, and you're like, all right, this is going to work.
It's real now.
It's real now. Exactly. On our shoot days and our test days as well, anyone will tell you it is rapid, fast pace. There's times where we're down to 30 seconds to make a change. They're in between takes. And they say, hey, this blend point's not working, or they're looking at a new angle or a new lens. A DP on the whim could say, I don't want that light. Well, guess what? Now they might give you 1 minute in between takes or 5 minutes in between swapping lenses or cameras to reestablish a seamless blend. And then that dictates the reality of it either being a final shot through camera, or it's going to become a post VFX shot that needs cleanup work. So I think one of the most challenging things when we're on final shoot days for the episode is that they can go anywhere and look at any corner. Sometimes on a shoot day, the director will just say, you know what, I want to flip the set around. I want to look at that corner. And you're like, oh my God, we did not expect this. And it's like, all right, let's do it. And we flip the set around. We say we need 5 minutes. And then in that 5 minutes, you take color correct regions and bring this down or gain that up. Or the director come by, he's like, actually, I want to open the doors and I want light to spill in. And I want there to be an exposure up or an exposure down. And you're like, all right, bust open, the sequencer and get those keyframes ready. And really, just anything can happen on set day. It's either you do or you don't. There's no trying. I think, some of our best stories, when things release, hopefully we can tell some of these stories of just these instances where we've just pulled stuff out of thin air and have just made a shot out of nothing practically. And that is the power of Unreal, is to make something out of nothing so quickly, because you can't do that in traditional VFX. Sorry, this takes 2 hours a frame to render, and I hope it comes out clean, or there wasn't a broken cache, or there wasn't flickering, or there wasn't noise. So that's the power, is that we're able to hit these crazy ideas on set on a whim and at least attempt them to make something out of nothing. And really, those are some of the funnest moments, because you're like, holy shit, I can't believe we pulled that off.
Yeah.
And not only, the people on set, but, the team, because then you think the person who built the scene, the organization of the scene, and all of these things are in place for you to make that successful.
Yeah, and it's always 5 minutes before your take rolls that the magic happens, is when you're there on the day, and you'll improvise something and you'll run into these happy little accidents that just work so well.
Yeah, and I love when we will still make the change when even the record button is on, because we know we have at least 10 seconds once record goes on before the actual final, scene is starting, or the director says action, that we say, oh, we have 10 more seconds here, go 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 go. And it's funny how we will grab for any second that we can get to make the final image bigger, or bigger or better. Bigger and better.
Bigger and better.
It's a labor of love.
And yeah, to kind of attest to the labor of love part of it all, I know Zach and I worked on one particular environment that always comes up in conversation, kind of like super early on in this show, where it was like, okay, we've built it out and it's good enough to go on camera. But then, like you're just looking at it, you're thinking about it before the shoot, and something's not working here, something's not working there, and you just start catching all this stuff. Maybe 8 hours before you go to camera.
Yeah, it was about 8. It was 8 hours before we had to be on the stage to shoot this episode.
And you'll just keep hammering away at like your own like internal notes until it just works better and better. And before you know it, you've really got to go to bed before you've got to run to the shoot in the next like 3 hours or so.
I mean, and I think anyone here can attest that we all face crazy issues. No matter if it's a huge studio like us or a personal project, you're always going to run into issues. You got to iron through those issues. You just got to brute force through them, because at the end of the day, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Then it just all comes together magically at this last moment. Things were looking grim there for a second. This person in management's going to have to tell the client, they're going to have to call off the shoot. It's a big deal. Yeah. And it's just like, you have that moment for a second and you just hammer through all these issues. And, an hour before the shoot, we submit it to Perforce and it works. And we had a successful shoot and the environment looked great. And at the end of that, we
was like butter. Yeah,
it was like butter. And we look at each other and we go, how the hell did we all do that? And so it's so important for, everyone out there just to, whether it's your own personal project or it's a big studio like us, we all face issue. We all face problems. It doesn't matter if you're one person or 500. I think it is. We all deal with the same issues, and it's just scalar at that point.
Yeah.
It's just a bigger issue with more people thrown at it. And I think that's the beauty of Unreal, is no matter if you're a big studio with a bunch of people or you have a crazy expensive wall to project things, or if you're just a person at your house with a green screen and a camera, you can do the exact same thing, and you have some, indie tracking software or Connect or something. Yeah. You can do the same thing. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that we can all be filmmakers no matter where we're at, whether we're just doing this on our own or you're out of high school or you're just picking this up for the first time. You can do it. And there's just such a plethora of resources out there with Unreal. It's just the content is so good with tutorials, and Unreal's even own little training academy through their website and all the free content. It's so important. I think as Asad will agree with me in this, it's just like download these scenes on Marketplace and reverse engineer them. That's where we learn so much. It's just reverse engineering stuff. Just all these free demos that they put online. Go in there. Say, how did they set up the shaders? How is the lighting set up? Let me turn off all the lights. What's baked? What's not? And just reverse engineering it and go, okay, now how can I incorporate this in my own project? And to really just R&D yourself, make your own project and say, what are my targets and goals for this project? And say, this project is just for this. And really just dedicate that project to it. And even if that project never sees the light of day, I will have learned so much out of that project that I can carry that on to my next project and say, okay, yep, I can confidently do this and call out this and have control over this. And just to fail and fail often, because that's where you learn. And pardon my language, but fuck shit up all the time. Screw it up.
Just break it.
Screw stuff up. Break it
and fix it.
Break it, fix it, learn from it. Yeah. And that you will come out stronger. And that is the strongest people we see. It's just people that constantly push themselves and say, okay, I did this and I failed, but what did I do wrong? And what can I do next time better? And I think that's what pushes all of us in this virtual production and any project we work on, is that we constantly push ourselves to each project. And out of it, we just every environment is just looking better and better from the very beginning to the very end. And the client is so understanding of that too. Like they're in this together with us. They're learning and we're learning. There's times where we may miss the beat, but they're understanding too that this is new technology and we're all going towards the same goal of just making a better product together. And so there is unity, and it's just so refreshing to see that on the front end of things, because we're just so used to, you know, traditional VFX of just getting everything at the end, and, you know, they've already filmed it and people say, all right, it's your problem now. And now, you know, with virtual production and all this tech, it's our problem. Because if we can't work together, then there is no final image.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Oh yeah.
And it's just, there's just a certain beauty in that now.
Yeah.
And I really hope it continues and, you know, carries on through other aspects of visual effects. So what is the future? What can we expect next? You know, there's some exciting new technology coming out there. Everyone's really excited about Unreal 5 and what Lumen can do, and Nanite, and all of this new awesome tech that Epic is providing the world with. So, you know, we're also super excited about that. We can't talk much about it other than that we're excited, because I think, you know, our ultimate goal with virtual production is real-time everything. I think that is the top of the pyramid that we want to get to, that we don't have to worry about baking. We just place a light and we run things, and things are performant, and truly everything is dynamic. And there's things there in place that are helping with that now in Unreal, like DLSS and RTX-GI. The ultimate goal would be real-time ray tracing everything. And once we hit that, we've hit Valhalla at that point.
Yeah, so that brings us to now. Having tackled virtual production for pre-production and production, next up on Pixomondo's list is virtual production for post. So basically injecting Unreal even deeper into the traditional VFX pipe and kind of using it for cleanup and like foreground elements. So just an all-around Unreal pipe. And in a post-COVID world, it's clearer now more than ever that virtual production is pretty much here to stay. Whether you're using it on kind of a $0 budget project, if it's just a personal thing, kind of as a previs tool where you're kind of flying around with your buddies and shooting stuff with an iPad maybe, just kind of using stuff from the Epic marketplace, all the way to like a larger stage, a big production with 500 people as a VFX tool. And on that note, there is a virtual production academy in development right now. We're going to have campuses popping up in Ontario, starting with Toronto. So kind of a more hands-on experience with virtual production, online courses, plus just actually being on stage and seeing what that process is like. For more info on that, definitely check out virtualproductionacademy.com to sign up for the mailing list. Or, you know, just reach out to myself on LinkedIn. And yeah, pretty much in the meantime, we're going to get back to wrapping some of these shows up, and we're going to have boatloads of footage to show you guys next year. So that's pretty much it for me. See you guys in the Q&A.
Bye, guys. Thank you, VRTO.
Thanks, VRTO. See you soon.